Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Magic Hour podcast. I'm your host, Shireen Campbell, and I'm the founder of My Little Magic Shop. One day, I lit a candle and asked for clarity in my professional and life path. Soon after, I was gifted with the message that I'm here to help others go through exactly what I was going through then. And just like that, My Little Magic Shop and the Magic Hour podcast was born. Welcome, Saint. I am so excited to have you as a guest today.
And I'm super excited to be here.
Yay. Okay, so on the Magic Hour, I always love to take it all the way back. Can you tell me a little bit about your upbringing? Like, where did you grow up?
So I was born in the capital of Florida, in Tallahassee. But I've lived pretty much in South Miami almost my whole entire life. I did move around a lot because my mom, she was always getting new jobs and stuff. So I've lived, let's see here, this might be a little lengthy of a list. Okay. Tallahassee, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Houston, Seattle, back to Houston, now again in Miami.
Wow, that is a lot of, that's some far movement too. See, and huge climate differences. Seattle and
Yes.
Miami, woo! That's
two polar opposite. One is very, very cold, and the Caribbean side of me was just not having it at all. It was far too cold in Seattle.
Oh man, I love it. Wow. Okay, so I imagine that moving around a lot, especially as a kid, because I changed schools a lot, like throughout elementary school through high school. And so I know that the effect that kind of had on me in terms of making friends and developing a community. And I know that definitely played a huge role in terms of me becoming very spiritual, very young, just kind of seeking these answers. And also to me, being a very internal looking person. Do you find that, this was one of the big things that played a role towards your kind of current path in spirituality, or was there something else?
It was really weird because, growing up, one half of my family on my father's side was not very spiritual, but they were more religious. So they would go to church every Sunday, and I would, go as well. But then on my mother's side, she was more of the spiritual kind of person. She never really believed that you would have to go to church to feel like God is with you. She's like, God is everywhere you go. And so she kind of taught me that, when I was younger, she's like, it doesn't matter where you are. You can literally pray anywhere. You could sit down somewhere. It doesn't matter where, so long as you close your eyes and just give yourself that second to feel that connection, that spiritual connection that you have, and just kind of say what you're doing, how you want things to work itself out, and then you learn how to manifest that. So my mom, without her even directly realizing, was teaching me the power of manifestation, which is why every time that we would move, every other kid, when I tell them how frequently I moved around and how many, different schools I went to, they're just like, but how are you so friendly and bubbly and you don't seem like you moved around a lot? And I'm like, because I had to learn how to, adapt to new situations. And I feel like that kind of goes hand in hand with your spirituality. You have to learn how to adapt to the things that life throws your way, because everybody thinks that spirituality is all, roses and kumbaya and hugs and, oh my God, healing trauma. And in reality, it's just sometimes it gets very ugly, and you have to learn how to deal with things as they come and learn, that power of that manifestation, that power of knowing that your intuition and everything that you're feeling does directly connect with your own spirituality. So what you learn from one person, it may not apply to you, but you could take that lesson that they're teaching you and you're like, okay, how can I take this lesson and apply it to myself? How can I use this for my own growth? Which was kind of what I did growing up. I would meet new people, be in new environments, and I'm like, how can this new environment help me be the best me that I can be?
Yeah, I love that. And I think you definitely bring up such a beautiful point about, how sometimes people glamorize spirituality, or they put on these rose-colored glasses and make it this, you have to be positive all the time. And it's I feel like any healer really understands that, you know, spirituality is very complex, but I feel like it's also just a way of being. Like there's something spiritual about everything, even the most minute thing like washing dishes. There's a lesson, you know, to learn in the smallest, most granular detail to like the big, large, you know, all encompassing things that can be messy and can be difficult and can be, you know, filled with shadows and darkness. But you know, like all of that is spirituality. So thank you so much for, you know, bringing that up and sharing that. It's really beautiful and profound. Okay, so tell me a little bit more about like being comfortable in manifestation, being comfortable in, I guess, these more not abstract, but like more, you know, like being in alignment with your spirit and with your intuition, like understanding this stuff, you know, relatively young. So I guess my next question is really about, you know, what led you to start to go a little bit deeper to actually take on a practice and, you know, dedicate yourself to that practice. So like I know that you're an astrologer, and I know from experience that astrology is very detailed and very thorough, and it does take some time and dedication to truly master it, to do well at it. So tell me about, you know, what called you to make that type of commitment.
So it's kind of weird because a lot of people won't believe me or don't believe me when I say this, but when I was 8, yeah, because that's when we just finished moving from Miami Springs to Tallahassee. I was 8, about to turn 9. My mom had bought me like this Bratz, I think, like coloring book or whatever. And within the book, it had each of the Bratz's, not like their zodiac sign, but they would give like a little bit of an information so that like a child could understand, you know, or like a teenager, how they could understand astrology. Mm-hmm. So when I was 8, I learned that I was a Sagittarius. And when I was reading this, I'm like, oh, this is me to a T. I'm very optimistic, very bubbly. I love meeting new people. I'm very, you know, a lot of people have told me that when they meet me and I tell them how old I am, they're like, no way, bro. Like, you're a baby still. How? And I'm just like, I guess I have an old soul. So that kind of started my journey, but I didn't really get too much in depth until I turned 18. And this was when I met a woman who's now my best friend. I remember we first met and she was like, oh, what's your big 3? I was like, my big 3? I'm like, what? And she's like, yeah, like, what are your placements? Like your astrological placements? Because she's like, you know, you're a Sag, but like, you know, what are you? So I was just like, what is this? So she sends me the link and I go on to Cafe Astrology, because that's normally where everybody goes to bring up like their first chart. That's kind of like the astro for beginners is Cafe Astrology, which I loved using that site to be able to just kind of start that journey. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at all of the my placements, and I'm just like, when I was a child, this was very funny. I saw that I was born on the very last day of Sag season. So there was a part of me that I would joke, and I'm like, oh, since I'm right there by like the Capricorn date, I'm sure that the sun was probably moving into Capricorn because I was born in the afternoon. It's probably like shifting over and moving. So I probably have like maybe some Capricorn traits. So I called myself a Capritarius or a Sagicorn as a joke. But I would tell people, I'm like, I'm a Sag through and through, but you know, maybe that responsibility that you guys think that I have, like that's probably because I was close to that date. Come to find out, in my tropical chart, I had a Capricorn stellium and a Sagittarius stellium. So I wasn't too far off. So it's like 8-year-old me already knew what 18-year-old me discovered 10 years later. I was just like, wow, that's really full circle. And so seeing that, I was just like, okay, I have to learn now about this, because I see people say Mercury is in Gatorade. What is that? Like, I see that all the time on Twitter. And again, this was when I'm 18. This is like almost 6-7 years ago. And I'm just like, what is that? Like, Mercury is in reggaeton again? Like, what are y'all talking about? So little by little, I'm like learning all these things. And I'm just like, wow, like this makes so much sense. Like if you want to understand not only yourself, but other people, astrology is like a phenomenal, you know, tool for that. And astrology can go hand in hand with your spirituality, because your chart shows you where you have like those past life, that past life trauma, those karmic traumas that you have to work through. And I'm just so happy that I found astrology when I did, so that I could start, you know, working on, you know, healing my inner child, working on the things that I know that I'm not so great at, which is, you know, talking about how I feel. I have a Sag moon. We tend to joke about everything and our emotions. We could be super serious, talking about something very, very serious, and then all of a sudden we'll just be like, but you know, it is what it is. Like, life sucks, but it's whatever.
Yeah.
And then people look at you like you're crazy, but it's like, this is how I deal with my emotions. There's a method to my madness.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and also with all that Capricorn energy too. So like Capricorn's not particularly like an emotive sign as well, you know, like it's definitely, and I think with Capricorn energy specifically, there's a sense of like distance that they like to keep. But just tell me, because I'm so curious now that you told me about all your stelliums. Give me your planet placements.
The tropical or the sidereal? Because I know both. But okay, tropically, Sun in Sag, Moon in Sag, Mercury in Capricorn, Venus in Aquarius, Mars in Capricorn, Jupiter in Sagittarius, Saturn in Pisces, Uranus in Capricorn, Neptune in Capricorn, and then Pluto in Sagittarius.
Interesting. So the only water placement you have is Saturn. There you go.
But in sidereal, that changes to actually Aquarius.
Mm-hmm.
So there's really like absolutely no water like in my chart. Yeah. So when it comes to being sensitive, I'm just like, I don't even know what that is. Like, I don't know what you want from me. I'm sorry.
But you know, it's so funny because, you know, with I think with Saturn in the sign of Pisces, that I mean, like Saturn really is kind of tells us where a lot of our work happens, you know. So I actually think it's kind of beautiful that, you know, like you have Saturn in Pisces, because the work that you're doing is very like, I mean, it has some Sagittarius energy to it, because a lot of people associate, you know, astrology with Sagittarius, but also there's that like that Pisces element to it, because it is this connection of all the things beyond the veil. So I think that it's like, it's kind of beautiful, because that is like a place for you to really learn and grow, and you hold a lot of karma there. So it like does give you like, you know, this sense to work towards that, you know, emotional growth or emotional depth that, you know, like you might not seem to have on the surface. But I think it's kind of beautiful. I love that. Okay, everything makes sense. Now I feel like I understand you better.
But let me also say, I have 5 planets in my 8th house.
That's all the witchy stuff right there. Wow.
Exactly. My main interest, like, it's so funny because when I was 13, and no 13-year-old thinks about this shit. I know that they don't. Oh. I remember one time I was sitting, it was like the middle of the night with my mom. Mm-hmm. And I think we were playing like Mafia Wars on Facebook. Like I had gotten her hooked. Mm-hmm. And so as I'm waiting for my lives to reload so that I could like continue to play the game, something told me, I'm like, I want to look up the different religions, because I'm just like, I understand Catholicism and Christianity, but I just don't feel like I connect directly with that. I've never had like a very personal kind of experience with Catholicism or Christianity. And so I'm looking up, you know, all these religions. I'm seeing that there's some people who like praise a pasta god in the sky called Pastafarianism, which is like a play on, you know, Rastafarianism. I saw Buddhism, and I'm looking at all of these things. And what's so funny is that in my adulthood, when I finally found that aha spiritual religious moment, was when I actually discovered Yoruba, which is la regla de Ocha, which is why I refer to myself as a bruja, because when you are, you know, a spiritual worker, a lot of people take the word witch and they think that it's negative. And I'm just like, I'm going to flip that word, because at the end of the day, if you do magic, essentially, like, what do you think you are? Like, you know, speaking manifestations or writing in a journal, that's magic. Like, but people kind of tend to go on this other side of trying to find something negative with every religion. And trust me, you can find something negative with literally anything in this world, but you have to, on your spiritual journey, be open to learning different things. Mm-hmm. You know, I learned about disassociating, you know, through Buddhism. That's actually a practice, being able to kind of separate your emotions and everything that has happened. I learned that from Buddhism. Mm-hmm. You know, I learned through Catholicism that while, yes, you know, you may sin and you could be the sinner or whatever, it doesn't mean that you won't be absolved like of your sins if you truly feel remorseful. So I've learned so many different things, and I just feel like I don't belong to just one religion. I feel like I'm a culmination of the best and the most beautiful part of, you know, our faith, our spirituality. And I feel like I embody that. And that's what brings me the most joy, because I don't just fit into like one box. I can take a little bit of everything and learn how to use that for my own spiritual growth. And I love that.
Yeah, I mean, that absolutely completely resonates with me on so many different levels, because I'm right there with you. Like, I feel like there's so much beauty in like all of the religions that I've learned about. You know, like Catholicism has like so many beautiful rituals. Like there's like you know, a sense of like mindfulness in a lot of their practices. Like I feel like, you know, I was raised Baptist, like the music like brought me so much joy. And, you know, like I love gospel music. Like I feel like I've, you know, connected with Buddhism and mindfulness. Like there are just so many different practices that I just love to take little pieces. Like I studied Kabbalah for a while. And like I thought that I feel like that might have been one of the biggest like foundational pieces of like the, you know, of my spiritual understanding, because not necessarily because of the actual text or practices, but because of the way that certain larger concepts were explained to me in a way that I can understand. So I feel like it really comes down to that, like taking whatever resonates with you and makes you want to be a better version of yourself and utilizing that. I think that there's so much beauty, but I just want to bring it back for a half a second, just so for those of you that heard her talking about the eighth house. So the eighth house really represents, you know, a part of our chart that tells us about our ability to connect with our intuition, like psychic abilities live there, our abilities to merge with other people. So like that could be like, you know, intimate merging, or just merging of energy. It's also other people's money, which is, you know, whatever, odd. And then also it rules property, but for the most part, from what Saint is explaining to you, it really has to do with this sense of intuition, this sense of connecting with transformation, your ability to make it down into the shadow world and to understand the depths of your own psyche. And so when you have a concentration of planets like she does there, then that makes you more likely to be intrigued or interested in those types of things. So I wanted to clarify that for those out there that aren't as familiar. But I find like, wow, like 5 planets there. You came here to make all the magic. Another thing that you said that really excited me was you mentioned Yoruba. Did I say it right?
Yeah. Yes, Yoruba.
So tell me a little bit more about that, and like let's talk a little bit about the term bruja. You know, like I know that you mentioned, you know, like trying to destigmatize the word witch, you know, which I feel like we've made some progress. People don't think about it as, you know, negatively, and definitely people aren't getting burnt, at least in the US anymore, for their types of practices. But I want to talk about the connection between the word bruja and Yoruba.
I know that a lot of individuals, when they think, okay, so how can I explain Yoruba? So I'm Cuban, and in Cuba, they do practice Ifa and La Regla de Ocha, which are 2 branches of Yoruba. The Yoruban culture really does focus more on the Ifa side, because that's more of like the predictive side, where you tell somebody, hey, this is, you know, it's kind of like a life path number that they give you when you receive a certain, you know, ceremony. They tell you these are things that you need to look out for and you need to pay attention to, because this could be, you know, like your downfall. In astrology, it's not as personalized as obviously, you know, doing this ceremony, because it's literally somebody sitting in front of you and doing this for you. Mm-hmm. Through astrology, they just kind of give you like that broad description of like, oh, you know, if you have like a certain planet in a 6th house, because the 6th houses represent animals, you know, if you have a certain planet or a certain asteroid that's in there, they might tell you, oh, hey, like you shouldn't be around like big animals because something could happen. It's just like very vague, right? Mm-hmm. But so Cubans do practice La Regla de Ocha, but it's referred to as Santeria. And here in the States, a lot of people still kind of demonize Santeria. They just think that individuals who are santeros or babalaos or practitioners of the religion.
Can you say the words just a little slower, just so everybody, because I'm like trying to learn them and you're saying them with the, like, you know, you got your accent going, and I'm like, I want to learn all
the words. No problem. Okay, so the main kind of names or whatever within this religion, you'll have a santero and a santera, which is the male and female. These are individuals who are inducted into the religion who have basically a saint has been crowned onto their head. It's called un asiento. So it's basically a sitting, like your guardian angel, they are now putting that saint on your head. So you have to walk around and govern yourself, not like as if you are that saint, but that saint is essentially giving you that blessing. Within the religion, we also have those that practice Ifa, which are known as babalaos. These are sort of like the Freemasons. They literally have the answers to everything. There's 256 different signs within the book of Ifa, and each person, you can have the same sign as somebody, just like in astrology, the same sign in the religion within your, okay, let me backtrack a little bit. All right. Your signal that you get, you receive that when you receive mano or kofa de orula. Orula is basically a saint, the one who is able to predict your future and to tell you, hey, these are the things that you should and shouldn't be doing in your life because you have been marked. This is your path, right? So you can have the same signal as somebody, but what may apply to a woman may not apply to a man, right? So if they say, let's say you and a man have the same sign within the religion, and it says, oh, you need to be careful when you engage in sexual activities with other women because something could happen and affect you negatively. If you're a woman and, you know, you're heterosexual and you're straight, you're just going to be like, oh, I don't really sleep with women. That doesn't apply to me. Yeah. So it's kind of like in astrology where some people, they'll kind of like take a meme and they'll look at it and they think that that's the end all be all. And they're like, oh, well, like I'm a Sagittarius or I'm an Aries and I don't really relate. The difference between astrology and, you know, the religion of Yoruba, it's two different kinds of witches. I've noticed that the astrological witches are a little bit more focused on paying attention to current planetary transits, while a santera, una bruja, un espiritista, an espiritista is just essentially calling somebody who is very in tune with their spiritual self, and they're able to kind of tell other people their own life just by looking at you. You could have never met this person, and un espiritista will look at you and say, okay, this is what happened in your life. This is why you were brought to me here today, and this is what you're going through. And you're just kind of there with your mouth open, like, how does this stranger know my life? But it applies the same way, you know, to astrology. When you have an astrologer read your chart, you know, I love this saying, a doctor cannot diagnose themselves. You're going to look at your own chart and then you're going to try to read your own chart and you're going to be looking for the answers that you are looking for, but you're not going to be paying attention to what your chart is actually trying to show you. So for example, you know, I have my Saturn in the 10th house. The more I read up about that, I'm just like, oh, so career-wise, I'm going to have a couple of stagnations. I don't like that. I'm not going to pay attention to this part that is telling me that my life, that, you know, I'm going to have to wait till I'm a certain age or a certain this or a certain that for things to come to fruition, because with everything, we are hard-headed. And it's the same thing with, you know, spirituality and within the religion. They'll tell you, oh, you shouldn't wear the color red because the guardian angel that you have, that's their color and they don't want you to wear, because if you wear it, something, you know, negative will happen to you. People think, oh, is that them trying to punish me? And it's like, no, they're literally telling you for your own well-being, don't wear that color because something could happen, you know, to you, right? So this goes hand in hand, astrology and spirituality. We all have somebody to teach us and to learn from, but it really is at the end of the day how you choose to take that information and how you apply it. Just because one statement or one part of your signal in Ifa, when you do receive Orula, if one part of that doesn't relate to you, that doesn't really negate everything else that was being said. They're just kind of covering all of their bases, you know, and they're trying to check off every single box and saying, okay, you can't wear red, you shouldn't eat shellfish, you shouldn't date people that have red hair because it could bring complications like to your life. Like, it's just very weird, super specific things. But again, astrology is also a very weird and super specific thing. So like, I just feel like everything really does kind of play off of each other. And the more I learn about myself through astrology, it's actually very funny. been able to connect to the spiritual side of myself a lot more, especially with learning about, the eighth house. That eighth house is like such a weird random house because it represents, taxes and inheritances and death and sex and the occult and, intimacy, bonding, merging, all of these things. And I'm just like, am I an enigma? Like, I would look at this and I'm lost, but that's just how spirituality is supposed to be. You're supposed to be lost. You're not born having the answers. You discover them along the way in your journey. And doesn't matter what religion, what faith, what spirituality, whatever gives your life purpose, that is your purpose. You intuitively are telling yourself, I want to be an astrologer because I feel comfortable. This makes me happy. And maybe in a past life, you actually were, an astrologer. You have, spirit guides that walk with you. Within my religion, we actually call that un cuadro espiritual. So in English, it just means spiritual framework almost, right? So they tell you who are your spirits, who walks with you. And a lot of people are like, oh, but like, how, if I don't live in a region where like they practice that, like, how would I know? And it's like, you do know internally. If you really sat down and kind of like allowed yourself to intuitively feel and say, okay, what is it that my ancestors want from me? What is it that my spirit guides want from me? And that first answer that comes to mind, everybody thinks, oh, you should always ignore like the first thought that comes to mind. And then, that's how you kind of develop yourself. No, that first thought that comes into your mind is kind of like your spirit guides tapping on your shoulder and saying, hey, that's kind of what we want. And it's so funny because growing up, I was super into tarot. I loved like tirando carta, like for other people and like doing, tarot spreads and all that. Come to find out, I have a spirit who used to do that. Like that was her profession, was, doing tarot and doing readings for people. And I'm just like, that's so funny that I picked this up on my own without anybody telling me. So it's kind of like spirituality is just learning how to trust yourself a lot more, because I feel like where people do have that disconnect is because, our soul has lived through so many lives, which is why we experience things such as deja vu. But you have to relearn life now through this vessel. You may have a very masculine personality or very feminine personality, and you are in a different body. So now you have to learn how to adapt, or you have to change that body to agree with, who you are. For example, I have a lot of masculine energy within my birth chart, but there's a part of me that is also still very, feminine at being as a woman, because that's what I identify with. But I do acknowledge that masculine energy, and I still give light to it because I'm like, this is still a part of who I am now in this lifetime. And I have to relearn everything that I've gone through, and I have to now experience it in this vessel. You can do whatever you want with this vessel. You truly can. You can tattoo it, cut your hair, dye your hair, change body parts, get a breast augmentation, get a fatter ass, like all of these things. You could change your vessel to conform to how you feel on the inside, but you also have to be appreciative of that vessel that you currently have that is holding in all of this beautiful magic that you have within you. And you have to remind yourself, my body is a temple. However you choose to decorate that temple is entirely up to you at the end of the day. But you have to remember, okay, I'm a spiritual individual having a physical experience. What can I learn from this physical experience, and how can I apply this to my spiritual growth? Am I the one who's holding myself back with my own mentality? Am I the one who is propelling myself forward by trying to be more positive and trying to speak manifestations, into life? We just have to remember that, like, we are so powerful. Like, people forget that. Like, it doesn't matter, okay, like, you are not going to be a CEO of a company, that's fine. Look at the importance of your life. If you have pets, or if you have family that depends on you, if you are not there, that power that you give, how would they survive? So to me, everything is just very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like full circle almost. So it's kind of like everything that we doubt within ourselves, like, am I special? Am I powerful? Am I this? Am I that? Like, that's where our depression and our anxiety kind of kicks in. And we forget that we're powerful beings. Like, our ancestors have survived for this long, pushing us forward. And we are the best of the best, the toughest of the toughest, the strongest of the strongest. Like, we are everything that our ancestors dreamed of, And even saying it, like, I get goosebumps because it's the truth. We chose to consciously make the decision to return and live another karmic life because we felt that our work was unfinished. So that's why I remind people, I'm like, hey, look at your 12th house, because the 12th house represents that karma that you bring. And your south node represents who you were in a past life, that you have to learn how to let go and embrace your north node, which is your fate and your destiny. So it's like your astrological chart can tell you all of this information, the same way how un espiritista or a babalao or a santera or a santero could tell you. It's all really in like the astrology. I've had people tell me things within the religion that I already knew because I read my birth chart, you know? So
I love that. I haven't met too many people that combine astrology with, and I want to make sure that I say the right terminology. So would you consider yourself a Yoruba practitioner? Would you, like, do I say astrology and the art of Bruja? Do I say the astrology and Santeria? Like what would be your preference in terms of how I want to make sure I phrase the question correctly?
Well, because I haven't had my saint crowned on my head, I would not be referred to as a santera, which is why I refer to myself as un espiritista, because I am very spiritual and I am still in this religion. I just haven't, done certain ceremonies for certain things. But within, the religion, it doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are. It just really matters how much you can learn. So I guess I would call myself the espiritista of astrology.
Okay, I love it. That's beautiful. I mean, going back to my question though, is like I've never really seen people use astrology Yoruba. Like I think that that's so beautiful because like I never, because I've seen other practices combined, like tarot, like you said, like card reading. I felt, because I live in East Harlem in New York, and so we have quite a few botanicas here. So like I've been to one, and I know I love the candle, like I love candle everything. I love candles. And I have had readings before. So I'm like, I've seen playing card usage, but I've never seen astrology. So I think that it's like such a beautiful combination. I love to see like that overlap of different practices, and I love to watch other people, kind of take the bits that they really resonate and love and then create something, that is very personalized to them to be able to share, into the world. So I think that that's beautiful. So like, are there any other practices from that religion that you utilize along with astrology to help, clients? Or
I think it's really like weird sometimes for me when I do like one-on-one consultations with people, because they are booking me to do, a natal chart consultation. But then, I have that spirituality, that espiritismo, the study of Santeria, which is the religion that I practice. And what's so weird is that sometimes like I don't even have to look at a chart, like just literally having a conversation with somebody, I can tell them about their whole entire lives. And they're like, how do you see that from my chart? And I'm like, it's just like a little bit of everything. I looked at your placements. I looked at where those placements and what houses they're in. And then I'm seeing how you communicate, how you're pushing your personality, like as you're speaking to me. And I'm taking in all of these things. And my main focus, the reason why I started studying astrology in the first place, is because I was looking for answers and asking all the wrong people. I was expecting somebody else to tell me about me. And then I learned through astrology, I'm like, the only person who can really tell you who you are is yourself. Other people are just experiencing you and what you're showing. So I kind of remind, my clients, I'm like, you can take your spirituality, you can take astrology, and you can take your faith, and you can literally combine all of them all together. That's the beauty sometimes, the beauty of the, the religion of la regla de ocha. Like they don't tell you that you need to stop practicing what you're practicing to be a santero or a santera. I actually have somebody that's actually within our house. He was a monk who was silent for almost 6-7 years of his life, and he took that vow of silence, and he studied all these different religions, and he's a santero. He still has all those practices, that he learned when he was a monk, and when he learned, traveling all over the world in search of, finding the answers that he so desperately was seeking. And then somehow, some way, he found my godfather, God rest his soul. He finds like my godfather, and they create this connection. And mind you, he's like Caucasian, like blonde hair, blue eyes, and he's like the most spiritual person that you've ever met. And like my godfather, and they met and they clicked, they had a relationship, and they just were like, it's like, I know you from a previous life. And what we fail to understand and realize is that we are souls that keep coming back, and we find our people. Like, so when you feel comfortable with somebody right away and you just want to talk to them and share everything, that person in one point of your karmic lives could have been very important to you, which is why you're finding them again. And sometimes within the religion, I've even seen, you know, some people, they'll be best friends, and then like they'll say, oh, you guys were sisters in a past life. And then you and your friend just kind of look at each other like, what?
I
like,
knew
we're
it.
friends. Like, I knew you were my soul sister, my twisted sister from another mister. So, you know, everything just really goes like just hand in hand. So when I'm doing like these consultations, you know, for people, I ask them, I'm like, what is it that you want this service for? Because that's what I feel like some people, where they mess up, is that they forget to ask the client, like, what are you looking for? Like, why are you choosing, you know, this service? Why are you choosing to come to me? Like, what is it that called to you to come to me to get this specific type of service? Because I do offer both. I do synastry charts, I do sidereal, I do tropical, I do annual perfections, horoscopes, tarot readings, you know, all that good stuff. And I ask my clients, I'm like, what do you hope to take from this? Like, what do you wish to learn? Because I can sit here and I can talk about somebody's birth chart, I promise you, for hours. I can dissect every single placement you have, every aspect, every house placement, houses in the sign, hours. Because this is a consult and we only have an hour to, you know, 2 hours, I want to focus on what you care most about and help you get to that point in your life. And that's where I tell, you know, my clients, I'm like, look, this is why you have, you know, these challenging aspects. This is why sometimes you feel like you have so much to overcome, and you feel like, oh, why do I have to be the one to heal all of my like ancestral trauma? Like, why couldn't they have done that a while ago? Why do I have to be, you know, the vessel and the strong one? And I have to remind people, I'm like, dude, you go through life every single day. And I even remind myself of this, being somebody who has, you know, anxiety and depression. I have to remind myself, I am a spiritual being just having a physical experience. And I tell my clients that all the time. I'm like, dude, just because something is not going good this week, that doesn't mean next week, if you don't change that mindset, that something great can happen. Because just because, you know, God closed the door doesn't mean that he won't open a window. You know, there is opportunity where you look for it. If you stop looking for it, you're going to feel like, oh, you know, everything is against me. But if you're trying to hold on to like that optimism of, you know, things are going to get better. I know it. You know, this is just how does that saying go? It's something like a setback for a bigger comeback or something like that. A minor setback makes for a greater comeback.
Yeah. And I mean, I definitely agree with you. I think it's very much about perception, right? Because like, yes, like a door could be closed, but you don't know why that door was closed. You know, like it could be for your protection. It could be because behind you, there's a door with far greater opportunity and an easier path open for you. So it's like understanding that even if something appears to be bad, you know, like it might not necessarily be bad. It could be something that is just guiding you because there's something bigger for you. So I think really taking the moment to like take a step back and reframe things for yourself is definitely incredibly important. And I think astrology definitely was one of those ways like kind of got to a deeper understanding of that. So I love that you bring up that point. Like I'm a big believer that things aren't happening to you, they're happening for you, you know? So I think that you bringing that up was really, really awesome. Okay, so big question for you that all of my astrology lovers out there are like itching to probably understand or know. So like, what are your really, you know, go-to tips? So like that could be books, websites, videos, teachers, whatever it is that really helped you to, you know, get to a place of mastery within astrology.
I learn differently from other people because, you know, when I was younger, I actually skipped a couple of grades. I was a nerd, okay? So to me, when I learn things, my brain processes information in a different way. I can read something and be able to regurgitate it back to you and teach it to you in a very simple way. I think the best tools when I first started astrology, was going to a website that could calculate my natal chart, but that also gave me maybe like a little brief synopsis, a summary of what this placement means, what this aspect means, what this planet in the house means. I'm gonna go there. A Sagittarius's best friend really is Google. I always tell people, I'm like, I have my PhD in Googlenomics. Like, whatever I don't know, I will Google. And then I don't just read one thing. I will read at least a minimum of 3 different sites just so I can kind of look at different perspectives, because the way that one person might be explaining or teaching something to you, that might not be like your style or your flow. I learn through reading. Other people love watching people explain things through videos, and they watch that and they learn because they're more visual. They're like, oh, okay, I'm seeing somebody explain it. They're showing graphics. Now I get it. Other people learn, through reading. And the books that I love the most are going to be Linda Goodman's Love Signs. It's a fantastic book. I love it.
My heart. I love Linda Goodman. Love, love, love.
She's just like so insightful, and the way she explains things, I'm just like, I hope that I could be a fraction of like a teacher that she is.
Yeah, she's old school, so like she's taking it back. Like this, I think one of her books, wasn't it like the 70s or something? I know it's older.
Yep. It was like 1973, I want to say. So it was like the early 70s that she had released that book.
I'm pretty sure they're all in I have like 2 good sections of books dedicated to astrology. So I feel you on Linda Goodman. Okay, keep it going. Who else?
I'm gonna do a little shameless self promo. I wrote a whole book by myself, about astrology, and I explain like the background of what astrology is, because there's always been like this argument between people who are actual astronomers and scientists versus astrologists, and then people of the public who see this argument. They think that astrology isn't real, and so I took that and I wrote a whole book, and that's the name of the book. If astrology isn't real, and then with the N and the T like in parentheses, because astrology is very real. If astrology wasn't real, how did I write a whole book? So there's this long-standing argument between astronomers and astrologers of, oh, you guys look at tropical astrology and you guys are saying that Aries is on the equinox and Pisces is actually on the equinox now. The constellations move and this, that, and the third. And I remember getting into like a really big argument with somebody like in the comment section, because they're like, oh, astrology is not a science at all. And I'm like, astrology is actually the oldest science, because had it not been for the astronomers, and had it not been for the philosophical individuals that would look up to the stars and be like, what is the purpose of this, had it not been for somebody looking at that and noticing, oh, hey, when this zodiac sign is close to this point on the equinoxes, it's going to rain heavily and our crops are not going to do well. People used astrology as like a tool, and even people who were royalty, kings, emperors, they would speak to astrologers and they would say, oh, for illness and famine.
Still do. So like I just want to plug that in there, because they're like a lot of presidents in modern history like consult with
Richard
astrology.
Nixon.
Yeah, so that's not. And I'm just gonna.
No, it was Reagan. My apologies, Reagan.
Oh yeah, Reagan. Yeah, and like I also want to just reiterate what you're saying, but I want to start with astrology and astronomy were once the same thing. So like I feel like that's a very profound thing, because it means that there was no separation between the two, and that means some of the greatest minds that arguably ever lived in science studied astrology and astronomy as one. So I feel like if that doesn't tell you like the validity of it, then like I don't know if there's any convincing that could happen. But yes, it's a very point that I get passionate about.
And what's funny is I remember, in this heated debate, I was looking up on Google, my best friend, I was Googling, I'm like, is astrology, a science? And it just so happened that in the high court, I believe in India, I want to say in Bombay, maybe, they ruled that there was no premise to say that astrology wasn't a science or that it is a science, because all of the information that was presented, why are you guys saying that this isn't real? Like, this is literally your birth chart describes you to a T. And then they practice more sidereal astrology. So they pay attention more to the fixed constellations, which is why there is that validity in that astronomy. Like, okay, you know, these people are actually looking at the constellations where they currently are now located. Tropical still uses the same method of drawing up a chart as it was 2,500 years ago when they first, you know, started drawing up natal charts, which I talk about that in my book. I give a history, you know, of astrology. I kind of break down chart patterns, chart aspects, things that people wouldn't generally gravitate towards because it's very intimidating. When you hear words like square, opposition, people get super stressed out. And I'm just like, you shouldn't be stressed out. This square right here is showing you that you are actually fairly balanced in your core identity. These two individuals may act a little different. Like, so for example, Virgo and Sagittarius, but when you really strip down who they are, what their essence is, they are always in search of truth and following facts and following, you know, that inner voice and that intuition, you know, that they have, being mutable signs. I feel like I explain astrology in such a way that even somebody who has no idea what astrology is, they just know their zodiac sign, I break it down in such a way that I can make the non-believer. And I actually did that last weekend. One of my boyfriend's younger brother, he just knew that he was an Aries, and I'm just like, what's your birth information? So we sat there, you know, for like 30 minutes, and I gave him like basically a personality description. I built his personality. And he just looked at me like,
you don't know me.
No, he didn't. He was surprised and taken aback. He was just like, how do you know this? And I'm like, it's all in the stars, baby. Like, what are you talking about? Like, this is your birth chart. This is why I tell people, I'm like, stop just looking at your zodiac sign. You're more than just the season that you were born in. And 7 out of 10 times in tropical astrology, whatever zodiac sign you have in your sun sign, if it falls between a 0 and a 23rd degree, you're actually the sign before that, because that planet was actually still transiting through that sign. It's just in tropical, we have specific dates because, again, we look at the equinoxes for tropical and we're like, okay, this is the start of spring. Aries is on the equinox. Boom, boom, boom. That's just how every other season is gonna go. And then it's so funny that like December 21st, which is the day I was born, is the beginning of winter, and it's the last day of Sagittarius season. That's a fire sign. But when you actually look at it, so I think it's up until like December, up until like January, like the first week of January, some people think that they're a Capricorn and they're actually a Sagittarius. So I see people all the time that, you know, they comment on memes and they're like, oh, I'm a Gemini and I know the other million Geminis and we don't act like, and I'm just like, what's in your birth chart? Oh, well, I have, you know, an Aries moon. I have Mercury in Sagittarius. I have Venus in Pisces. And I'm like, oh, so you have levels to you. There's range. It's not just you being a Gemini sun, right? Because people forget that your zodiac sign is not the end all be all, and it does not encompass all of your personality and how you act.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like people do come to me, you know, quite a bit with this, like, I'm not, you know, like people say like I don't act like a Capricorn, and I'm like, you know, one thing I noticed really interesting, or when people over identify with either a sign directly before or directly after, is that Mercury travels very close to the sun, and so very often Mercury will be right like in the sign next door. And so Mercury really rules the way you communicate and the way that you're able to process and share information. So like that is a huge part of your personality. So if you don't have Mercury in the same place as your sun, like that's just adding this different layer, and you might be identifying a little bit more with that Mercury energy and less with the sun energy. And so once I like understood that little tidbit, and I only practice at tropical astrology, so at least this was my comeback to whenever people were just like, but I, you know, like I'm on the cusp and that's why this, and I'm like, well, where's your Mercury? Let's look at that first, and then we can talk more about all the different layers. You know, like we're very complex beings, and I think that astrology captures that so beautifully. So I'm with you on the oversimplifying of the sun sign, or only taking astrology, you know, at sun sign level, which I think is definitely like not giving it its due. So I love that. Okay, I have one big question for you that I think will wrap things up to some extent. But what do you pick? Like, if you have to choose between tropical astrology or the other, like, where would you go? Like, what do you feel like you lean most on, or do you just go back and forth all the time?
I do go back and forth all the time, but if I'm being entirely honest, what solidified me choosing sidereal astrology, and it's gonna sound so stupid, it's gonna sound so crazy. I read one placement. I saw that in tropical, I had Venus in the 9th house, but in sidereal, my Venus was actually in the 10th house. And it was just this one sentence that said, the native's father may be a Taurus or a Libra. And I'm like, my dad's a Taurus, that's it.
I love it.
That was like literally it for me. I'm like, wow, this is like super accurate, because I would read like the Venus in the 9th house description and I'm like, oh, I kind of feel like I relate to it, a little bit with those Sagittarius qualities, that I have, the Jupiter influence. But when I started reading about my Venus in the 10th house, I'm just like, this read me better than like anyone could ever read me.
You know what's so interesting? When I think of you, Venus in the 9th house makes sense. You're a lover of learning. You were a true explorer through and through. Now,
if I'm being honest, if you were to say that in front of my mom, she would start laughing. Because trying to get me to study or to finish something was like trying to pull teeth. And I feel like
Sagittarius energy too. They love to learn, but that don't mean they finish it.
So to me, when I was reading Venus in the 9th house, it kept telling me like, oh, you're going to find like love abroad. And I'm like, I have not even left the United States and I've already found the love of my life. This is not accurate at all. Like, what you mean? The love of my life is going to be a foreigner. That doesn't make sense. But the Venus in Capricorn description resonated more than the Venus in Aquarius. Yeah. Because like my love language is really like acts of service, which is very Capricorn. Like Capricorn won't directly outright be like, oh my God, you're the love of my life. I love you so much. I cannot breathe without you. I cannot live without you. Venus in Capricorn is like, I bought your favorite food. You want to eat? Hey, I got tickets to like this thing that you said that you really like. You want to go? Like, that's my kind of style. And when I was looking at Venus and Aquarius, they're like, oh, Venus and Aquarius loves, long distance relationships. I hate long distance relationships with a passion. I'm just like, why would the love of my life be somewhere else and I not be there? So I would read this and I was just like, I was constantly going back and forth. I'm like, is astrology even real? Yes, it is. Like, hello. And sidereal for me was kind of like that final nail in the coffin of like, dude, astrology is super real, scary, creepily accurate. And it just really took that one sentence. The native's father is a Taurus or a Libra.
I love that. We have to unfortunately wrap this conversation up, but like, I feel like I would love to sit and just have a huge debate about tropical versus sidereal. Like, I think it's so fascinating. Like, I'm like thinking now in my mind that I should have like, I don't know, just like it could be a whole conversation about it, just because I find it so fascinating and I'm not as familiar with it. But I'm just like, because I'm still thinking, your Venus is in your 9th house. Like,
yeah.
So, and you're like, no, it's in my 10th though. But I love it. Thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. I feel like we got to cover so many insightful and wonderful topics. And, thank you so much for sharing, stories of your own personal development and your own personal struggles. And I think that is definitely incredibly useful and wonderful for other people to hear, especially as they're going through their own self-care journeys. So here at the Magic Hour, we always love to end an episode with 3 Feed Your Soul questions. So, pretty quick questions, just about, how you care for yourself and make sure that, like you're maintaining high energy levels. Not to say that you always have to, being a healer. So the first question is, are there any consistent activities or rituals that you do to maintain a sense of inner peace?
So I guess the one thing that I really gravitate towards a lot when I'm taking care, of myself, because self-care to me is very important. The one thing that I always gravitate towards has been music. Music is a wonderful way to put you in a better mood, or it can actually, deepen the mood that you already have so that you can kind of experience whatever emotion it is that you're going through. So it doesn't matter if I'm happy, sad, or mad, funny, but I have like a playlist or go-to songs for when I'm feeling a certain feeling. And that's how I kind of take care of myself. I kind of like scream it out like in the music. If I'm angry or if I'm sad, I put on like the saddest song in the world and have like a good cry. Or if I'm in a great mood, I listen to music that like makes me happy and makes me feel like I'm the baddest bitch in the world. Like, so to me, my self-care really is just, you know, listening to music and creating music at the same time.
Yeah, I love that. And I forgot to talk about that with you. You'll have to come back and talk with me again. But like I did check out like some of your music. Your voice is so beautiful. Like I was like jamming out for a little bit as I was doing my research. So like you guys definitely have to, you know, through her Instagram page, which she'll tell you about in a little bit, but you definitely have to listen to her music. It's really beautiful. When it comes to self-development, what are the books or tools that really offered life-changing discoveries for you? So I know you had mentioned a few astrology books. Like, are there any other books that like really just like blew your mind?
A book that I really love that I started reading it, and it's a little bit difficult to understand it because it's in shorthand, but I really love The Art of War. I started like kind of diving into that, and that showed me how to like just navigate through life. And then this book that I really, really love, I forget who wrote it, but it is called The Art of War, but for women. So that kind of like specified, you know, the art of war, but how to harness it and utilize it, you know, and tap into like that inner divine feminine, which it doesn't matter if you're a male or a female. Everybody has that inner divine feminine, just like you have that divine masculine energy. But reading this book really helped me kind of get more in tune with my own femininity and realize that it's not a hindrance, it's actually like a blessing. Because I used to be like, oh my God, I'm a woman. And then on top of that, like I'm biracial, I'm, you know, native indigenous, and then Black, and then I'm a woman. And oh my God, it's just everything. Mm-hmm. But I learned how to step into that power by, you know, reading The Art of War for women, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And I do recommend to anybody who is trying to look for their own power and what that means for them.
Oh, I love that. I'm definitely adding that to my list. It'll be in the show notes, so don't worry, guys. Okay, my third and final question is, you know, I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, but when you're in an emotional rut, like what are your go-to ways of really bringing yourself out of that feeling? So I know you mentioned, you know, music, but is there anything else that you like really turn to kind of like release those emotions and be ready to, you know, step into new emotions?
It's kind of weird because me being who I am, I don't know if it's the Sagittarius that's within me, but being around other people and being able to just kind of like talk to them or just spend time with them kind of helps me out of my rut, because transference of energy is very real. So I'm always very careful about, you know, hanging out with people when I'm in a bad state of mind, because I know that that could transfer over to them. But you know, sometimes I'm like super thankful to my Sagittarians, which is what I call my followers. I will hop on Instagram Live, and even if I'm having a bad day, like I'll be explaining something and they'll be like, oh my God, bro, you're like the funniest person ever. You're amazing. How do you do this? You're so smart. And I'm just like, why are you guys being so polite? Like, what? Like, why are you being nice? What did I do? And they're just like, we appreciate you. Like, look at what you're doing. Like, even when you're in a bad state of mind, like you're still choosing to try to educate people and be selfless. And that's something to be applauded. And I'm reminded every day by my followers, like, oh my God, your content makes me feel so seen. I love when you go on Instagram Live and talking to you and you telling us, oh, you know, today I'm having a bad day. But the reason why I'm probably having a bad day is because the transit moon is going through, you know, my 6th house, which is like stressing me out. And so I show people like that I use astrology to help myself out of these ruts, and then they also help me because they give me the opportunity to be able to talk and to explain things to them. So I'm super thankful, you know, for my Sagittarians for even giving me a platform in the first place.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. It's definitely, I mean, that completely resonates with me because, you know, every once in a while I get an email from like, you know, one of our subscribers or like someone I've worked with, like done some sort of healing session, and they write such beautiful notes and like, you know, that, not that I'm like, I know that there's a line between, you know, seeking outside, you know, stuff for your self-worth, but I think you still have to be appreciative of when you do get messages in the most beautiful and needed moments that kind of remind you of what your mission is. So like I'm a big proponent of that. Oh, Thank you so much. I super, super love talking with you today. So can you tell our listeners and our viewers how they can follow you on your astrological adventures?
Okay, so on Twitter and on Instagram, my @ name is Sassy, Sassy, Gyal Sag, so GYALSAG. So Sassy Gyal Sag, SASSYGYALSAG. That's my Instagram and my Twitter. And if people want to learn a little bit more about astrology through my perspective and join me, as I am educating myself further through astrology, I do have a subscription. I do use the OnlyFans platform, which you can still type in Sassy Gyal Sag and my name will pop up. If not, you can also visit, my Instagram, the link in my bio. It's, right there. I have all of my contact info on my Instagram. So that's like the best place to kind of get a hold of me is through Instagram.
Yep. And definitely you can listen to her music also. Okay.
Yes, on Spotify, St. Jovena.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening to the Magic Hour podcast. If you want to learn more, you can find us on our website, www.mylittlemagicshop.com, and follow us on our Instagram @mylittlemagicshop. See you next time.